as Jen said, it'd be great if we can use chat a little bit this morning to just kind of keep us on track. I've got a fair amount of stuff to get through, should be about an hour, but please do jump in if you've got specific things you want to learn about. So the first question I want to ask, just to get us going, is whereabouts you're joining us from this morning. So if you just use chat to do that, that'd be great. Somebody's in sunny Dunbar. It's always sunny in Dunbar. It's not sunny in Porty today. Gosh, we've got somebody from Cardiff as well. Fantastic. Great. Cool. Well, that's just to help us get kind of used to chat. So it's cold in Dunbar as well. Fair enough. That's sea breeze coming in, I guess. Right. So the next question is, have you used Trello before? So just go yes or no. Doesn't matter if you've only used it a wee bit, just to kind of give an idea. So it's looking like a fair few yeses, but a fair few no's. That is all right. And then the last question I'm going to ask just now is if there's anything you really particularly want to know today, so like a thing you're thinking, right, I'd really love to hear about that this morning. And obviously it might be that as we go on, that prompts a more specific thought. That is fine.
I love that John Rebecca says use Trello properly.
Yes. You can use it however you want.
I know.
One
I was
nice
like,
thing
is there a
about it
proper
is,
way? I don't know.
yeah, yeah, cool. And a bit on buy-in and a bit on the difference with Trello and Planner. So yeah. Okay, cool. Consistency, costs. Great. Okay, I'll come back to that in a wee bit as we need to, but the next thing I'm going to do is I've got, instead of sharing slides this morning, I'm going to actually share a Trello board. So I'm going to use it as our kind of thing we work through. So that'll help you see some features as we go, and should also hopefully be easy enough to follow. So I've pasted a link into chat. I think some of you may have got this already because I've seen that some people already joined the board. If you want to follow that through, you can join the board. You won't need to be able to edit the board for lots of stuff, but it just means you can see it as we go through. But I'll be sharing screen throughout. So if you've got any issues with joining, don't worry, just relax and watch what I am sharing on the screen. Okay, that sound all right? So in terms of structure, I'm going to start with a bit on the principles behind Kanban. Then I'll go into a bit of a basic tour of Trello. I'll demonstrate how I use it on my own to-do list and give another example of how you can use it in a monthly planner. And then we'll be kind of rounding out with a few more advanced tips. And then I'll maybe also touch on the questions people have asked about buying and collaboration. Okay, grand. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. It's going to be this one. So this is just it's both a demonstration board, but I've got the content for this morning on it as well. So it had this welcome everyone card so that people could just track that and see what happens. So a lot of people have joined that card, but I'm going to archive that one to just keep it out of the way. I'm going to archive that whole list. And on this board, we've got our plan for today, which is like our backlog. So this is a big list of everything we're going to go through. A to do and a doing and a done. So what I'm going to do is for each little kind of 10 or 20-minute segment, I'll pull stuff through to the to-do column. So the first bit we're going to talk about is we're going to do background and introduction, a little bit of history to start the day. Then a few questions that I think are quite important when you're approaching Kanban so that you know what might be the best fit for you. And then we're going to talk about two key concepts behind Kanban, which are work in progress limits and defining your done. That sound all right? Cool. So we're going to make this a bit bigger so you can all see it okay. Can you give me a quick thumbs up if this is clear enough? Lovely, thank you. I always want to make sure I'm not kind of sharing the world's tiniest screen because that's very annoying. So the first bit of history, which may not be news to all of you, is Kanban began in Toyota factories in the 1940s. So as you can imagine, making cars, you got about 10,000 bits in a car, I think. So inventory is really important. And one thing Toyota wanted to do was avoid having vast stocks of stuff, because the more inventory you've got, the more expensive your production is. But the problem is if you've got very short inventory, your production can stop and start very quickly. You run out of wing mirrors or exhaust pipes or other bits. I won't go into too much detail because it's not a class about car construction. So they developed this system called Kanban. And Kanban actually means notice board. So what Kanban did was add little cards. So right through the factory at various points, each bit of the production line could see these signals showing them how much inventory was available. So they could see what speed the rest of the production line was moving at. And also they would get advance warning if something was running low. So they could send a signal back up the chain and make sure inventory kept flowing. So the whole idea was instead of just focusing on your own bit, you're focusing on moving flow through the system so that it stayed really efficient, meant the inventory could stay low, but also meant that production could keep going, keep moving. So it's a very useful system in this kind of manufacturing environment. And this list here shows that there's kind of 6 quite tight rules behind it. If you're applying pure Kanban, so the original system that Toyota used, is that each part of the system has to issue signals to say more inventory, please. And another one is that nothing happens without a request or a signal through the system. So if you're using Kanban in a very purist way, you don't just do random stuff, you do the stuff that you've agreed to do within the system. And also, particularly important in manufacturing, you can't send a defective item to the next chain. You've got to make sure it works. You've got to do it to the agreed quality. And also you limit the work in progress so you get clear on exactly what you can fit in a day. So I've slightly paraphrased that one there. But the system that was developed by Toyota had these quite rigid rules behind them. And that's because if you get vague in a big manufacturing process, it can get very expensive very quickly if the production line has to stop or if you run out of key components. And this was then adapted by the software industry using agile methodology. And again, there's quite rigid logical rules behind it. And the way that people use, I'll scroll down a bit so you see this board, this bit of a share. You've got a backlog, which is your big giant long list of things to do. And then work in progress, which is what you're doing at this moment. And a good rule of thumb is your backlog can be quite long if you want, but your work in progress list needs to be short because it needs to be realistic and achievable. And what an agile software team will do as they begin each sprint or period of work is agree together what's realistic to do, and then only what can be done in that block of time goes on the list. And that's a really important point because within agile software development, you use a concept called the time box, where you just do what you can do within that phase of time. If something can't be done within that time, you park it, keep it in the backlog until your next phase of work. And also, as with the Toyota system, work gets pulled through. So as space opens up on the Kanban board, you can put more work items in and move them through. And you can stop and start in an agile Kanban board. So if there's a big problem, you might all spend half a day together working to fix that to keep things moving. So that's a bit of context, a bit of history. If there's any question on that, then fire away, but I'll assume it's kind of fairly uncontroversial and just keep rolling along. So the next one is a few questions that I think will help you decide whether you want to use Kanban in a very formal and purist kind of way, or whether you want to use a slightly more flexible adaptation of it. So the original Kanban system as developed by Toyota is really good if you've got very tight constraints on capacity and workload and lots of dependencies, because it helps keep that flow happening. But another thing that you need to keep in mind is that works well if you're reviewing your board very frequently. So if you're looking at your board several times during the day or on a daily basis, it means it does make sense. But if you do what some teams do, which is do a bit of planning and then ignore the board for a week or so, that can be a bit more challenging. And the final point is how clear you are about when things are going to move to the next stage. So with some types of working, like manufacturing, it's really clear, has the car been painted yet? Are all the tires attached to it? It's really obvious if something's complete or incomplete. But if you're talking about, say, doing some research or producing a draft report, it may be less clear when it's done. So just to give a quick example, I've completed this checklist now, so we can say this card is complete and we can move it to done, all the way to done. So if we're all right to keep rolling through, I'm going to move on to work in progress limits now. Is that all right? Okay. Can I just check it's still clear enough as I kind of hide and show these cards? I'm aware that it's slightly different to a slide deck. It's working okay. This board will stay live as well after the session. So if you've missed something as I've gone through it, you'll be able to go through it at your own pace later on. So the concept of a work in progress limit is that a lot of the time when we work with teams, we kind of try and cram everything in and do lots of stuff. So, you know, if you ever talk to somebody, say, how's it going? They're like, oh, busy, busy, lots going on. And the problem is if you work in that way, what you end up with is busy people. So people's capacity is maxed out. It means that if something unexpected comes along, you've got no capacity to deal with it. And also, if something stops and starts, you can feel under pressure as well. But one really important way of using Kanban is instead of optimizing for maxing out people's capacity, you're maximizing for finished work. And one rule of thumb that some people use on the picture here is if you're optimizing for 75% all the way through, that gives you that much needed slack to kind of keep things moving along. So it can be a much more beneficial way of working. It can take a while to get your head around this because I think people are going, oh, does that mean we spend 25% of our time looking out the window? And the answer is not really, because there'll always be something that comes along that you can pick up and work with. But in your plan, it's important to have a little bit of space and overhead. So I'm just going to close that image if I can. And there's a few links here. So I've got the image from this blog from a guy called Adrien Liard, who's a digital product manager, does these great little cartoons. And this link here is a little article by Oliver Burkeman in The Guardian, and it covers applying work in progress limits to your personal to-do list, which is a really interesting practice that I am trying and not always succeeding in doing, which is about thinking about having 3 really important things to do in a given day and then really focusing on them, because quite often we'll maybe write a to-do list that has 12 things on, try and do them all, and then get fed up with ourselves about the 4 or 5 things that we didn't do rather than recognizing the things that we did get done. So that's just highlighting what a work in progress limit is. So to just kind of demonstrate it in practice, we're only doing one thing at the minute. We're going to do this one in a minute as well. I'm going to zoom out to just show you something. If we had 10 items in doing, we'd probably be violating a work in progress limit. That would be unrealistic and it wouldn't work. We just get stuck. So that's why we're doing this idea of pulling through a couple of ideas together. Is that clear enough on work in progress limits? Yeah. It's probably one of the more unusual bits of Kanban because it is a bit at odds with how we often approach work. The next concept I want to just highlight before we get into a basic tour of Trello is a definition of done versus acceptance criteria. So this is a really big image, it's taking a while to load. So in software development, you traditionally have acceptance criteria, which is about kind of technical and user-centered criteria. So you'd say, when our software hits all these technical requirements, we're going to call it complete. So it's a very tight technical definition. It's really obvious if it passes or fails. And sometimes you will have things like that. So maybe it's a new way of working and you got to make sure there's safeguarding policies being ticked off. You've got to make sure that there's a risk assessment in place and all those kind of things. So you might be able to run down a checklist and say, done, 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 done. That means it's ready. But there might be other things where you just need to have a slightly looser definition, where you maybe say, is this good enough? Are the team all together satisfied that this is okay to go? The main thing I think is to be clear about which way you're doing it. Are you doing it in a kind of tight checklisty way, or is it a slightly looser way? And if it is a looser way, what you probably need to do is to have some point, whether it be an internal deadline or a check-in point where you can say, right, let's look at this together and decide if we're happy with it to go. Because what often happens with team collaboration is, if it's unclear whether something's done, you might get some team members who are really quality focused who say, I'm going to keep that doing because I want to do a little bit more in it. And you might have another team member who's a bit more big picture who says, well, I think this is probably fine. So you get into a bit of a difference of views about whether something's ready to go or not. And also, if you're in a position of managing a team, if all your team don't share the same approach to what counts as done, you can't be sure what's still to be done and what is ready to go. So it's really important for work items. I think once you're adding something to a Trello board, as well as thinking about what is that task, what have I written on that card, it's quite useful to have at the back of your mind an idea about when you're going to count that as complete and finished. And sometimes you could add that as a description of the card. So you could say, in this case, so I've said this will be complete when I've explained this concept. So that would mean then your team could say, right, that's happened, so we're happy that's done. Is that clear enough? Cool. This is a little bit abstract, these two, but I thought it was important to kind of set the scene first before diving into the technical stuff, because I think understanding these concepts helps you with everything. Are there any other quick questions at this stage before we move to the next little phase? No. Okay. Right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a basic tour of Trello. So I have got a checklist in this because I want to make sure I check off all the key features. Now, some of you might not need this because you may already have got to grips with it, but we'll just go through. So the main features of Trello, to just kind of orientate you, are on your Trello account, you can have a board, which is basically equivalent to a document. So you can invite people to that, like I've just done to this one. I'll just show you, if we go back, when you've been using Trello for a while, you get a big long list of boards. As you can see, I've got hundreds of them. You can invite people. So the easiest way to do that is what I just did, which is to click an invite and get a link. If you want to, you can add people by email address or name, so one by one, but the create link is often an easier way of doing it. In chat, somebody asked a question about what are the big differences between Trello and Microsoft Planner. And I think one big obvious difference would be Microsoft Planner is linked to your Office 365 account. So that means your teammates should be able to collaborate nice and easily because they're on the same Office 365 setup. But it can be hard to share a Microsoft Planner with people who are out with your organization. Whereas in Trello, you've got a bit more control. You can just share that link with anybody. So it can be quite useful for cross-team projects where you're working with external stakeholders as well. So we've done invites. So a list is basically just a column. So I can create lists. I could add another one here over to the right. And you can have as many lists as you want, and you can move them around as well. So I'm moving a whole list here. You can archive a list. And that's all I'm going to go into for now, because there's a few more advanced tips we can do with lists in a bit, but I'm just kind of showing you the layout at the minute. And a card then is just any item in a list, and it can have a title up at the top. And then you can add description, attachments, comments, lots and lots of detail. And you can move cards about the list as well. So I could move this back to do, and move it along. So it's the basic unit that you move around a Trello board. Attachments, I've got a link here. So an attachment can be any link from the internet, a OneDrive file, Google Drive if you're using that. So this again is a reason why Trello might be more useful than Planner. So Planner is obviously very closely linked to your Office 365 account. So any files you've got, you can automatically embed them in and link them. With Trello, you can use a wider range of services, but you need to set up the integrations a bit more yourself. And then checklists is just a little list in the back of a card like this one we're using right here. So you can add multiple checklists to one card. And if you're adding a checklist, you can copy a checklist you got elsewhere. So that's quite a useful tip if you have a big task that you do all the same time. So I'll give an example for Jen, perhaps, is Jen has to organize dozens and dozens of calls. If she had a standard checklist of steps she needs to go through, she could copy that across each time. In this case, I haven't done one, but you can just add multiple checklists. So these are all sitting on the same card. We're doing well through the main features list, but we haven't done this one yet. I'm just going to delete that to keep it clear. Zoom in again. You can add members to a card. So I'm going to add Jen to this one because I think she's here. So if Jen is added as a card member, that means if I've set a due date on it or I add new comments, she'll get notified. So I can then tag Jen by typing @Jen. And that means Jen and her Trello notifications will get. And that's quite a useful feature. You might use it to keep a team member in the loop, or also if somebody's being assigned a certain task, they can get notified there. So there we go. A due date is pretty obvious. You can just set a date. It usually defaults to your current date today, but we could make it due tomorrow. If that's been applied, it'll start showing you an alert as it gets close. And then we've got labels, and labels are like tags that you can add to cards. So we can add these. So you can add as many labels as you want. I've added intro to this because it's an intro item. A really quick tip, if you go back out of a card with labels, is if you hover over a card, just without clicking, press 1, you get your first label. If you click the label, you can see what it says. So I find this useful if I'm just batch labeling cards. Okay, so we've done the basic tour then. We've covered everything in that checklist. Are there any other quick questions about some of the basic features? I'm aware that Trello has loads and loads of features, so I don't want to kind of miss something important that somebody's thinking, how do I do that? I think people are looking fairly content. Okay.
My notifications are going, John, because I've been assigned to that card. So
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, Jen.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Just to confirm it does work.
Yeah. Another tip similar to the members one is if you hover your mouse over and hit M, you can add lots of members. So I could add Chris to this card if I wanted to. Hope you don't mind that, Chris. You can take your, the other thing is you can take your stuff off. So if you get fed up, you can say, right, I'm getting off that card. Once you've got labels and card members in place, you can filter by them. So when you go to search cards up at the top here, I can say I only want to see the intro items. So that's just showing those. Some have got 2 categories, so they're still appearing. Or I could filter by Jen. So that's just going to return that one card that Jen's a member of. For any extra features in Trello, they're almost always somewhere in this menu up here, show menu. And you can do things like, one question somebody asked me the other day is, how do you delete a board? There's not a big obvious delete button, but you go to more, close board, and then you hit close, and then you get prompted if you want to archive it or not. Okay, so that's the basic features done. I'm going to take that filter off because I might as well. Let me take it off. Hang on. The filter is applied up here. I couldn't see it because everybody's head wasn't off it. Right, so that's how some of the basics. I'm now going to show you my own to-do list and just show you how I use this in practice. I'm just checking chat because I think somebody's probably asked a useful question. Where do archive items go? Can you see them again? Yeah, so I think if you did search, it would show everything in every Trello board, including archived items. And I think you would have the option to recover them again. There may be a time limit on it. I'm not sure because I'm in a happy position if I've never had to try and recover something from archive. Okay, any other quick questions on the basic functionality? Do you think upgrading is worth it? That's a really good question. I think the main thing that upgrading would enable you to do is to have more boards. So the big limitation the free Trello plan hits you with is you get like about a dozen boards or something like that. So some teams I'm part of here, if I were to try and make a new board, I'll just do it quickly and create a board. I have no boards remaining in this team, and I got 4 remaining in this. So that's the main limitation we've experienced in terms of not being able to use much in the free plan, but you can do quite a lot. It's not like some software, if you're on the free version, you're really, really limited, but Trello, you do get to use a fair bit. Okay, I'll now just show you my to-do list to just show you a kind of live list in practice. Has that share changed to the new list? Yeah, seeing a big board of the mountain on. Yeah, cool. So the way I use this one is, first of all, I share it with a few colleagues. So if they want to know what I'm up to, they can see. And then over on the left, I have my big picture objectives, the kind of big kind of annual goal type things. If something new comes along, I put it in here to start with in my to-do column. And then what I try and do each day, although I don't always manage it, is pick a few big things and shove them in here into in progress. So just the other day, I got to move this one into done. That was nice. I don't really have any calendar or anything like that, but that's the way I try and use it. And you can get plugins for Outlook and Slack where you can send stuff straight from those programs into Trello. So I use that sometimes, but not always. But mostly, I think for me, it's about having a bit of time each day where you do that time where you look at it and say, what are the 3 or 4 big things I want to get done today? Because I think very often trying to make the list too long is where we fall down. So that's a quick example. I don't think there's much more, because it's such a simple board, there's maybe not that much more to show you that hasn't already been shown in this one. So I'm going to move that to done. And now this is intro and advanced, so I'm going to say it's actually advanced only. And I'm going to just highlight, I know I talked about this at the beginning, you know, what is classic Kanban? So it's using the system in a very kind of rigorous way. And I think that's really advantageous in manufacturing or software development, where if dependencies pile up, things go very wrong. But it can be a bit more challenging for more generalist teams because workflow doesn't necessarily work in that way. So the benefits are it's clear and unambiguous, you know what's what. It puts a real priority on flow and keeping the whole team moving. So that's a really nice thing, particularly about the agile method, is if something really gets stuck, the whole team could all crowd in and help make something work. If any snags or delays are coming up, they're kind of signaled really well ahead of time. So particularly if you're in a management role, you're not sitting there wondering, I wonder if this is going to complete on time. You have a kind of early idea that something may be a problem. And it can help improve focus. So if your team are sitting there saying, what should I pick up next? It's already there. It's really obvious from the system what the next thing that would help the team move ahead is to do. What are the disadvantages? It's not so well suited to fluctuating demand. So if you're in a role or team where you've got to flex to accommodate that, it can be a bit trickier. It requires quite a lot of thinking and shared thinking and discipline. So you need to be really clear as a team what your definition of done is, and you need to be looking at that board regularly. So often the pitfall that teams run into is they make a really brilliant plan and then don't look at it for 2 weeks and then discover that they've forgotten some really important stuff. And they've done some other stuff that was probably really useful to do, but it wasn't on their board. And it can be difficult for teams if they're juggling multiple activities. So if you're in the software world or if you're in the manufacturing world, your job is to make software or to build cars. So everything you do will make that overall process happen. But if you're in a role maybe where you're spending part of your time dealing with people face to face or getting to meetings, but part of your time doing some research or some planning, it can be a bit hard to make those multiple strands fit together on very classical Kanban. Any other quick thoughts on that card at all? Just looking in chat. Great question from Eleanor about, yes, so if you're on a board, you've got complete edit rights. So that's both a good and a bad thing about Trello. So I think the bad thing is if you get into like Trello wars where one person says, I haven't done that yet. And then somebody else says, no, we've done it. And they move it backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. It can be a little bit maddening, but I actually think that the editing capability is actually a benefit because it just encourages teams to get stuck in and use it. They're not having to say, oh, I need to email a manager who's then going to update a spreadsheet that I might look at sometime later. It's very hands-on. And in our team, when we've used it really effectively, we often have a Zoom call where as we're talking, people are doing live changes in the board, so you can see the flow happening on the board. So that's a really beneficial way of working, so that it's, you know, there's a big sense of permission there where people can just get stuck in. And Jen has made the really useful point that the activity log is really helpful. So you can see that by clicking the little bell up in the top. It's often red. And there's lots of stuff going on here where I can see what's been going on across all my boards. Okay, any other quick questions then? I'm just seeing there's one. Thanks for Eleanor, no problem. That's there. We're doing really well in terms of time, so please feel free to stop me if you've got big or small questions. What I'll do in a moment is go back up to chat to see what all people were asking earlier on to make sure we covered off everything. We're now going to cover the example of a monthly or weekly planner. And this, I think, is a way that a lot of teams may end up using Trello to begin with. It's less rigid than Kanban, but is quite a useful approach. So maybe I'll show you the example first rather than going into the principle of it. So here's the way it would work. You'd have each list or column is a month, and all your tasks are cards, and you just move them around. So as a manager, you can sort of see, right, what are the big things we've got working on this month? And as team members, it's this kind of quite high level overview of work, it's looking at the bigger things. What you can do is have a done column for each month. We haven't done this yet, but we've done some of them. So you'd move them around. So once they're done, they would get moved off. And then I think the important discipline here that you can see that we're not fully implementing here is once a month is complete, everything would either go into the done column for that month or would have to get pulled forward into the next month. So that if this was being run in a very efficient way, there'd be nothing in this column because it would all have turned into April done. You'd have made a decision about whether you completed it or whether you need to carry it forward. And that, I think, speaks to one of the challenges of working this way is you need to think about how often you look at your list together. Because if you only look at it once a month, it'll get out of date quite quickly. So you probably need to have a practice of looking at it once a week and then seeing how things are moving. And the thing I think you'd be watching for as a manager is if you zoom out a lot and see if one month, the current month, looks absolutely massive, then you've probably not planned your work very well. Here it's a bit longer, but it's not ridiculously long, so it's probably okay. So that's a way that people can use Trello on a kind of month by month basis to see what's going on. And you can see here that I'm owning most of the tasks at the minute. We need to update the board a wee bit, but other team members would have it too. And we're categorizing a wee bit into different strands of work. So that kind of hybrid approach, the benefits are it's a bit less of a break with how you might traditionally plan work. It allows you to plan ahead a bit more. So one problem with a very classic Kanban is it's very short term. So it helps you understand what the flow is like in the system on that day and in that few days, but it doesn't really help you think about what's capacity going to look like 2 months ahead. And also the weekly, monthly planning helps you bring together a more diverse range of activity all in the one big list. The disadvantages of weekly, monthly planning, it doesn't really have the same tight constraint on capacity that a traditional Kanban board has. So there's a massive tendency to go, oh, we'll get it all done next month. And then next month becomes this massive long list that you're not quite going to do. If you're planning at a higher level, it can be a bit less clear what the status is of a given task and when things need attention. And it can get a bit messy and hard to organize. So if a lot of people are throwing all of the work onto one big giant board, it can be a bit confusing. Just picking up a question from chat. Yeah, so Essie, that's a really good point. Planning 50% planned and then recognizing there's a lot of other work happening is quite a good way of covering it. So yeah, that's a quick example of a sort of hybrid way that a lot of teams might use it. So the last card I've got on my list is about more advanced Trello tips. But I think before we do that, I'd like to check back up the list and see what people talked about. Culture and buy-in was a good one. So easy to adopt, how to collaborate. So yeah, how to manage the number of boards. Do you want to say a little bit more about that question, Ailey? Because it was an interesting one, managing the number of Trello boards. Hang on a sec. Eleanor's asked a question about the weekly, monthly planner. But Ailey, I'm just wondering if you had a question about numbers of boards, and was it an issue in your team that there's loads and loads of them and you don't know where to look? Or okay, that's fine. Good question. So the person who asked the question about weekly or monthly planner, so there's two things. So the first is that's just a board I formatted that way, so you can name the list whatever you want. So I could turn to do into May, June, and so on. But on this board, I've just chosen to name them to do and doing. So it's just the way that you set the board up. But there is the option to show a calendar on Trello. I need to find where it is. It's one of the power-ups. So it's an add-in. So once you've added it, it then shows you now. None of my cards have any due dates. So, oh, one does. The basic tour needs to be done by tomorrow. So that gives you more of a chronological view, which can be helpful. But it works well if you've been quite disciplined at applying all the due dates to your cards. Does that answer that question? Yeah. So Chris is making the point, yeah, there's that difference between the kind of departmental cross-team planning. And I think monthly planner would be good for that. And managing tasks across multiple boards, yeah, that is a tricky one. So on the free Trello, you can copy a card from any board to any board, but when you copy it, they don't stay in synchronization. So I'll give you an example here. I can copy this one. I could put it on my to-do list. And I could put it on to-do. And it's copied all that content, but that's not going to stay in live sync. So that's a bit of an issue. Now, that could be a good way that you could maybe, if you had a team discussion about a monthly or weekly level plan, and you got tagged in a lot of cards, you could then copy them across to your own list, but you then had to do some manual updating to keep it up to date. There are plugins to do synchronization of cards across multiple boards, but they're a bit pricey, unfortunately. That's the frustrating thing. It's such an obvious feature, but you have to pay for it. And Chris made the other point about managing tasks across multiple boards. I think it would be about that, taking the big picture from the monthly planner and then applying it to your own list and maybe doing a bit of capacity planning as you do it. And I think a big point that I would probably stress on buy-in is running Trello and Kanban works really well if you've agreed a time frame for reviewing it together. So it could be a weekly or maybe even a daily stand-up. And in my experience, any Trello board works really well if people are looking at it regularly and updating it regularly. But if you get into a situation where it's only every couple of weeks or month, then it becomes out of date quite quickly and it becomes of much less value to the team. So yeah, and the other thing I think that can help people be more on top of what's going on is tagging them in cards so that they see they get a notification as the progress happens, and that will come through to their email account as well if you want to do that way. Yeah, so Chris is saying break away from the Gantt charts, and I would agree. I think Trello is a much friendlier way. It's really accessible. Often if you're living in Gantt chart world, I'm sorry for people that are having that experience. I think one of the big challenges is what can end up happening is one person with expertise gets given the job of, oh, will you set up the project plan because you can make a nice Gantt chart, and it looks really lovely on day one, and about 3 days later it's out of date, and only one person in the team can kind of keep it up to date. Whereas with Trello, it's just like moving a sticky note on a wall, you just move it along. So it's very accessible in that regard. Okay, what does the butler function do? The butler is basically about automating stuff. So it gives you suggestions about what you might want to do, or not. Hang on, it takes a second to load. Here we go. So it looks at little things you might want to do. So I'll give you an example on a rule. So this would be one for like a massive micromanaging project manager, which is if anybody adds a card to the board that isn't me, add me to the card. So it would be like if you wanted to helicopter manage your team, you might want to do this. I wouldn't recommend it. But another rule you could do is you could say when a card is moved into not the board, hang on, we don't want that one. When a card is moved into done by anyone, you could archive the card. It's probably the one you want. So that might mean as you move through, now obviously this would mean you lose track of what you're doing, but you could also do it based on time or date or things like this. So this is a whole set of if this then that rules that mean they would help you do things like keep your board cleaned up. Going to catch that one, or you could do one based on due date. So you could say some examples. The moment a card is due, bring it up to the top of the list and join the card. Or the Sunday before a card is due, put it on a card this week. So these kind of rules could help you, obviously you need to provide the input in terms of what the due dates are and so on, but they could help you manage a really messy board by automatically kind of moving the cards for you. So it's a really useful feature, but obviously it depends on having accurate due dates and things like that. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Butler can get really, really complicated, but if you're using Trello a lot, it's worth using. Chris has added, how can you flag it up to non-agile senior management? That's a really good question. Something that's in terms of outputs and inputs, something I've done sometimes is share, screenshotted a Trello board. So you could maybe do you could have an extra column that could be key achievements last 2 weeks. And then you do a little bit of tidying up, shove it all into that column and say, there you go, it's a screenshot. Might be a little bit light touch for some people. Another super duper tip that I'm going to show you because I really like it is, and I'm going to stop share a second, do a new one, is from Excel, and you can take a worksheet with any data in it. Need to find some dummy data. It's not confidential. Okay, this is a bit from a checkup. Right. So I'll screen share again to show you this. So say you've got any list in Excel. I think this is my favorite Trello tip. So I'm building it up a bit here, but I really love it. Right. I've got a big list in Excel. I'm going to copy it, Control C. I'm going to go back to my Trello board. I probably need to do a new share to get there, don't I? Yeah. Right. I'm just going to paste it in. It's a big higgledy-piggledy list, but I want to make 29 cards. There we go. So if you were in a non-agile management organization, people might have a big list of issues or whatever, and you can just create a Trello card from each cell, which is a very nifty tip. And then you can archive them all because you don't really care about them. But yeah, so that's a quick tip. I'm going to check chat for any other questions. I think the other one I would use sometimes in reporting back to management is if you've got a monthly planner working well, like zooming out and seeing which months look really long can be good, or color coding about priority or confidence can be a good one as well. You could have a on track needs attention column. I'm going to just look at more advanced tips now. So we covered Butler, which I think I would call an advanced tip for sure. Look at a card and think about something more advanced. A nice thing if you put an image in as an attachment is it will set as the card cover. So that's quite a visual way of showing something. And that could, a good example for that would be if you were reviewing a website, you could screenshot the issue, make that the cover of the card. So then when somebody is approaching that task, they can see what the problem was that you're trying to deal with. On the activity, it's like a kind of feed of comments. So I could say, so I could ask a question of Jen, she may reply. And you can use emoji and things like that as well. I think Jen's typing right now, maybe. So my favorite thing about Trello, apart from Excel import, I think my favorite thing is the fact that it combines the high level overview, but all the detail as well. Because I've worked in a team where, and I'm sure everybody has this experience where you've got people at either extreme. So you've got people that are massively big picture that just need to know like, what's the 30,000 feet view of something. And then you've got other team members who need to know, right, exactly what punctuation we're going to use on the cover of this report. And you need both, right? If you don't have the big picture, you won't really make much progress. But if you don't have the detail, when it comes to crunch, you're not going to actually implement properly. And I think what Trello does is it gives the kind of 30,000 feet people this kind of view where you can go, look, here's the big picture. And then you can be detail focused and go right in and say, right, here's all the subtasks we need to keep on top of. And also, I think, although there's lots of advanced features, the basic interaction with it is quite nice and simple. It's kind of obvious what's going to happen. So I think that's, I guess, my kind of things I like about Trello in a couple of sentences. Integration into teams. So that's a good one. So ones from previous employees, I think what you may have to do is remove them from the board and then close it and then archive it. Chris, to your question about Teams integration, I think the sad answer is it's just not as tightly integrated as Planner. I think, Microsoft built Planner as a kind of, well, we want something that's like Trello, but within our own setup. So you may find it a bit harder to integrate. But I know within our organization, at across departmental level, Teams is definitely our messaging platform, but we use shared Trello boards pretty well. On the activity feeds, that will come through as an email, so it can fill your inbox up quite a bit if you're on lots and lots of boards. But I think if really tight integration is key, it may be worth looking at Planner. It does follow the same basic format as Trello. It's maybe just slightly shorter of features, and that external sharing is a bit more difficult as well. We don't use Teams properly either. Yeah, I don't think anybody uses Teams properly, but we're all learning, right? Any other quick questions? We got to nearly 12 o'clock. I'm happy to go a little bit longer if people would like to do that. But also happy to wrap up soon if you'd like to. Everybody content? One last thing that I'll mention before I forget it is you can make a copy of a board. So that's what I'd suggest you do is after we wrap up here, if this content is useful to you, just hit copy board and then you can get a copy of it for your own use. I also don't mind if you want to change the board, it's just content and pull together. I think that is a big difference with using Trello as a team, is you need to get your team comfortable with anybody can jump in and edit it. And I think if everybody's looking at it often, then that feels fine because they're like, oh, I can see one card has moved one place. But if you have a situation where some team members hardly ever look at it and some are like moving cards multiple times a day, those people who aren't watching it can feel a bit out of the loop. Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. I'll wrap up there for now, but I hope you find it useful.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, it's so nice to I'm a massive Trello fangirl, as if you came to the Curve 2020. I probably mentioned that about 14 times. I think like the thing for me as well is probably don't just limit it to your to-dos. Obviously, we've been talking about Kanban a lot during this session, but you can organise almost anything in Trello. So that's why I was so I found the question at the start is, or the kind of point at the start about how do you use Trello properly? I don't think there is a proper way. It's just it's basically replacing the wall of sticky notes in your office, but allowing you to have something that is a lot tidier and a lot easier to update. So thank you everyone for coming along, and please go and flourish with Trello. It makes me feel happy. Just a couple of bits from me. As usual, we've got a really short feedback form. It will take you 2 minutes, but it'd be great to know your thoughts on the session today. And I'm just going to pop in a link to further workshops as part of the Curve series. We're doing one a week at the moment, and the next one I think is on web accessibility, so that should be really, really interesting, helping you make sure that you are providing accessible content on your website. And there's some workshops upcoming on SEO and things like that as well, a good variety of topics, so please do go and have a look. That's it from me. Have a lovely rest of the day, and we'll hopefully see you at a workshop again soon.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.